the tariffs may help American companies sell more in India, which is what they want to do. But I'm sure it will also help Indian companies innovate.
India gives you a higher valuation for every extra percentage of growth.
Yeah.
Versus the US gives you a higher multiple for every extra percentage of cash. India में तो Revant वैसे भी reforms don't happen proactively, right? They happen reactively.
Indian companies are now playing at a global stage, whether it's an Oyo, whether it's a Lenskart, whether it's Fresh, all of these companies going IPO are actually, I mean, it's going to be a big theme for Indian companies now to go global. Look at UC in India, right? It's like 1,000 crores after like 8-9 years. It's a beautiful business. It's monopolistic.
I am not yet in the camp where I say that urban company is also going to be a compounder on the profitability side for a long time.
There is some romance to doing really hard things well.
How should we look at the impact of tariffs on our decision making over the next 1 or 2 years?
Hi everyone. Today's episode we shot 3 days back, not knowing what was going to happen over the last 3 days. The escalation of the war and the seriousness of the situation, especially at our borders, has become much more than we ever imagined. We are continuing our programming and releasing the episode, but frankly, deep inside our hearts and minds are with the Indian Armed Forces. With hope everyone is safe, and as the situation progresses, Revant, Chirag and I will see what to do about the programming of our weekly episodes, because we are not sure whether this is the right time to release the kind of content that we usually do, but would love to hear from you and hope you enjoyed today's episode and stay safe.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 26 of Asymmetric. Thank you for the great feedback on the last episode. All of you seem to have loved it. It's on a tear. So many comments, so many views, so much engagement. Clearly, we've done a good job in getting our guest right last time. And with that, today's guest is a little stressed because we put a lot of pressure on him saying that we have to outdo last week's episode. But would love to introduce Tushar Behl, who's India lead for Glade, Brook, a large private equity growth stage fund, which does investments in India. Their marquee investments include something like Zepto and a lot more. Tushar used to be at Falcon Edge / AlphaWave before that, and before that at Kalari, which is where I had the privilege of onboarding him into the venture ecosystem from Bain as such. So welcome, Tushar, and I hope you have fun today.
Thank you so much, Revant. Looking forward to it. It's always been fun learning from you, seeing you, being around you. And I'm glad. Thanks for having me over.
Great, I know. Thank you. And I think we have sort of a few news items to cover. I think there's the Zomato results, there's the urban company DRHP, there's the Ather IPO, there's the tariffs and its impact. So a lot of stuff to cover. We don't have time to cover everything, so we'll at least try and cover a few large topics. Would love to get your perspective, especially as a global VC now looking at US and India, on what's happening on the tariffs, as well as your views on the urban company DRHP in depth. And I'm sure we can touch upon a few other topics given time as well.
Yeah. Sounds good. It's always a fun time doing all of these things. I just came off a month-long trip to the US. It's actually funny because the day I landed, uske agle din hi, the tariff announcement at the Liberation Day happened. So I could see the difference between yesterday and the day after, and what the East Coast looks like versus what the West Coast looks like. I was in this SEBI conference in US a couple of weeks ago, and there was this very interesting chart. If you'll see what were the sort of the go years of the blue chart is the total equity risk premium. The blue bar is the total equity risk seeking capital coming into the Indian markets, mostly domestic. And orange is the supply of new paper in the public markets. So 23-24 May, the demand was outpacing supply, and which is why you saw like this great bull run. And now in sort of 25, that has kind of matched with each other. So you're seeing even the asset prices come down a little bit of the highs. So the question then, from our world standpoint, is the IPO window open, and for how long?
Very interesting. Everything in the end comes down to just pure supply demand, right? Very interesting chart that we had so much demand for Indian paper and so little supply. And last year it was equally matched. And I'm sure in hindsight, if we look at this year, it may seem that there was a little bit of going back to what was FY19, 2021, where the supply was more than what the demand was.
This year, if you like in FY26, the expectation of supply was supposed to be very high. But now, because of the way markets are, people are trying to also time it and saying if I can stay private for a year longer, I will stay private for a year longer. Like I know at least of 3 companies which are above $2 billion in market cap, which were planning FY26 listings, have now pushed it out by at least a year.
How much can you really time this, Tushar? Like beyond a point?
Yeah, mushkil. It's a fool's errand actually. You shouldn't be trying to time it. If you think you are ready as a business, then you should go ahead and list it. Your private shareholders will be okay to hold you for another year if it requires that to catch up. Because like these things will not turn on a dime by itself. And जो time करने का time था वो तो चला गया. मतलब वो जो 2 साल थे जहाँ पे supply demand gap was very high. Those years are now gone, and now everyone has caught on to this trend. So this supply demand gap will now broadly get matched out. It won't be like that disparate as it was like a couple of years ago.
But
And if we double click, then is it that domestic supply has gone down?
Uh,
Looks like.
Sorry, domestic supply or domestic demand?
Demand would have gone up, no?
वो सारा domestic demand ही था, Chirag. The entire
हाँ,
chart was only domestic
इसमें
demand.
तो was entirely domestic
It was
demand.
not internet. It was only domestic demand.
So the
हाँ.
domestic demand would have, is it because of the gap left by foreign pullouts?
Yeah, so if you see, the demand ka number in absolute terms has not gone down. It is just the supply which has gone up. So that is how the matching is happening. It is not because the demand is going down as such.
On the timing bit, I don't think businesses that are going IPO today, especially that are venture and growth equity backed, have an option because there's an exit ask, no? Because the choices are becoming harder and harder. Like, for example, Zepto not going public in FY26 will mean they'll have to raise private capital again, which also takes management bandwidth away significantly, right? And will also mean that based on the amount of funding you're able to raise, then your business, your strategy will change a little bit based on that. How much can you burn, etc. But if we take a case of urban company, which filed a DRHP, all they did is we said we are ready for IPO, but because the demand may not be as much as we thought, we will just reduce the size of the IPO. We'll still go IPO, right? So I think those are two distinct choices people are making. Where, of course, urban companies also another example where investors have been sitting now for almost 10 years, and there is a large part of the cap table that wants to exit. Which is why the OFS size has, I think, remained same, but the company didn't. I'm assuming the valuation will be a little lower, which is why the company has chosen to raise lesser amount of money in primary. So I think there are 2 or 3 different segments of venture-backed companies that want to go IPO. One is if 10 साल होने आए हैं, सबको exit चाहिए, तो you want to go IPO, and max you can do is delayed by 1 more year. But again, you have to raise maybe private capital to stay. Like, for example, Rebel was similar example, right? Like maybe it could have gone IPO this year, but then they raised private capital and a lot of it. So I think they'll stay private now for 2 more years. And maybe there'll be more secondaries for the folks who have been in the system for more than, in fact, most of the round that happened recently was secondary for all the early investors to exit. So I think a very strong secondaries market does allow a good company to stay private longer, as you're saying. But some of them may be forced to do it sooner rather than later because maybe the secondary markets are also not that attractive per se. And the best ones are still, to finish it, best ones are still saying that we will go when we are ready. If we are ready, we go. Doesn't matter what the time is. But there are very few of those, it looks like.
That's right. I would say the IPO delays coming from companies which A, don't have a vintage pressure on them, and B, do not are largely in control of their destinies, that they can afford to put off an IPO for about a year. And which is why you'll still see a very healthy supply of paper this year as well in FY26 and from our tech world as well, because like you said, like a Rebel or even a Pine Labs for that matter, these companies have been around for almost. Pine Labs would be now first stage capital in 2008, I think.
2006 company, I think, yeah.
2006 company raised capital.
I think the older company, the first investment from Sequoia, which is now peak, happened in 2006.
Yeah, so like about 20 years coming to the hilt, right? So there the vintage pressure is real, and there you will see people trying to like not time the market and just go public at whatever price is available to them. I think UC is also probably a little bit in that camp. I won't say entirely, but a little bit in that camp, because it's also been around for some time, and people want exit, and which is like you rightly pointed out, Reva, the OFS is real, right? But you mentioned something very interesting about a strong secondary market, because this is what I'm seeing happen in the US, which is insane to me. Companies like Stripe, companies like SpaceX, they will potentially never go public.
Because you're saying even at $200 billion or $100 billion valuation, people are willing to enter, saying that we know this is a compounder and will give us 20% IRR.
Yeah, forget that. People don't even need to enter Revant. These companies throw so much cash that every 6 months they do a tender offer to buy back people. So there is this entire class of companies being created in the US right now, which creates so much cash flow that they are willing to like just buy back stock either from employees or from early investors piece by piece. Every 6 months, like clockwork, there is a tender offer where they set the price themselves and they price it also in a reasonable way, where there is upside left and like it's not that you're being mooched off, because then otherwise the secondary market will not thrive. And the intent there for the founders is that with the cash flow, we will buy back the equity, shrink the equity base, so that ultimately we are the sole owners of that business.
Yeah.
essentially.
I think the best example of this is Larry Ellison, right? I don't know if you guys know,
Yeah,
over 25 years,
absolutely.
he bought back so much of the stock that today he owns 40%, and that's how he ends up being one of the top 10 pitchers guys. Like, the
Yeah.
company is not that big, but his ownership, I think, went from 10% to 40% over time just because they kept buying out or buying back shares from investors using the
Yeah,
capital.
you keep shrinking the equity, and then what happens is when the float is lower, then the marginal investor also moves the price much more for you.
Yeah.
So,
Do you see that happening in India? Do you see that potentially?
Exactly ulta of what we saw in the other, episode of what MSCI China did, wherein they kept growing up, but they kept diluting. Hence,
yeah, you
both
never
promoter
get.
shareholding as well as return
Yeah,
from that perspective was lower. So this is exactly the opposite which is happening. Wow.
yeah. Revan, इंडिया में अभी इतना नहीं दिखने को मिल रहा है because कितनी कंपनीज which can do this right at scale and size. मतलब either they are already public, in which case
No one's
those
throwing up that
buybacks
much
are.
cash. Like, if I see Uber also throwing up 10 billion of free cash flow every year, that's a lot of cash. I think if I look at Indian companies that have gone public in the new age space, technically they're reinvesting in growth, which is fair because we are a growth market. See, we could argue that, like Dipinder could have said, I'll throw up 500 or 2,000 crore of profit every year, which is what technically the food delivery business is throwing up right now, and say that I can play the same game, right? But I'll grow at 17% year on year. But then he's choosing to say, no, I'll grow another business 100% year on year. And looks like by the end of this year, Blinkit will be a higher revenue than
Food delivery.
food delivery and growing 100%, which means that it will be 2x the size in maybe 2 years max, right?
Yeah.
So I think the growth versus, and US, let's say, being a steady state, in fact, the GDP is degrowing this year, right? Because of the entire tariff thing, or
Liberation Day.
the entire macro factors. So, anyway, even if you see the last 10, 12 years, US was a 2% GDP growth rate. So in that economy, maybe this makes sense. At least the Indian,
Yeah.
I'm sure all shareholders in India would say that, boss, India is a growing economy. We are, I think some people, I like what they say, we are a 777 economy, right? 7% interest rate, 7% inflation, 7% growth rate, or a 666 maybe. It was used to be 777, now it's 666.
No, you should. I think Kashyap would probably have a better handle on these numbers, but I think you are absolutely right in that India gives you a higher valuation for every extra percentage of growth,
Yeah.
versus the US gives you a higher multiple for every extra percentage of cash.
Yeah. Yeah.
And won't it come there at some point of time, just because there is, let's say, what we were hearing the other day, if post IP also 20% is a great number from a annual growth rate perspective in India, right? I'm sure parallel to that, US will be 8 to 10%.
Yeah.
So when the higher growth is available, my sense is more dollars will chase. If you don't chase, then I'm sure a new company will get born, because,
Yeah.
what we have seen, let's say Zomato was doing Blinkit, but then there came a Zepto, right? Which will happen in our country just because there is higher growth rate. You lose out market share, then everything, because there is dollars available, everything will get, your existing business will get questionable, even at scale.
And actually, I think generally speaking, our markets, even in US, I feel there are moments in opportunity and time where they start valuing growth a lot more. For example, look at AI right now, right? The Max 7 has just like really run off on AI over the last like 3 years, because everyone is saying, oh, this is the area of growth and this is the future, etc., etc. And if you are not in this, then you're dead and don't talk to me. This was a very interesting dichotomy I caught on my last US trip between East Coast and West Coast. I landed in US on 1st of April. 2nd of April was the Liberation Day. न्यूयॉर्क में सब ऐसे सर पकड़ के बैठे हैं. There is like, oh, world is coming to an end, this and that. And Valley is like, go, 3 term sheets a day, AI company, 500x multiple, let's do it.
Very interesting. I think the difference between an innovation, see, money managers who look at opportunities through pattern recognition always hate these black swan kind of events. Whereas money managers who are more playing the venture game, or at least entrepreneurs who are playing the venture game, which is most of Silicon Valley, always see opportunity in adversity, right? कि boss, अब तो पूरी game change होगी. Let's, like, even we can win, right? And you can see, like companies also think that we'll get disrupted. I'm sure funds also think that we'll get disrupted if we don't innovate, right? So
Yeah.
I think the overall energy, it's an interesting perspective on the West and East Coast per se. But I think we should maybe take this segue into the tariffs piece, right? I think how the US has reacted is something that they have to figure out. But what's your view on the impact on India? Like, we still are unclear on where are we going to end up with the trade negotiations with the US. I'm sure the both sides are actively at it. But do you see that the Indian venture ecosystem, Indian startup ecosystem, growth investing, early stage, as well as entrepreneurship and operators, like that's most of our audience. How should we look at the impact of tariffs on our decision making over the next 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, I am so terribly excited by what the tariffs will throw up as an opportunity for India and broadly our neck of the woods. I'll come to why I see that happen, or why I think that happens, and what needs to fall in place for that to happen. But just to answer your first specific question, which is around where we are in the negotiations, we have been speaking to some people who are in the know of these things, both on the Indian side as well as on the US side. And when they announced the first set of tariffs, the first sort of 4 or 5 groups that they wanted to negotiate with was EU as a bloc, Japan, South Korea, and India. And I think India seems to be the first one of the blocks. So I won't be surprised if you will see something happen over the next week to 10 days itself. And India will likely be the first party to have a deal with the US. Because EU still doesn't have its act together on how they want to negotiate this, because it's a big group, etc.
Also, internally, they're a little screwed because there are a couple of right-wing.
Yeah, it's a mess, yeah. EU ke liye, it's very hard to drive in the same direction without the Schengen block sort of breaking. So that will take some time, which is why, you saw JD Vance was in India. Our finance minister was in US prior to the terrorist attacks happening, and then she had to fly back. That might have thrown some spanner in the works. But there have been a lot of engagement which is happening. Like, one of my favorite things to do is to check on Flight Radar which Indian private planes are going from New Delhi to Washington DC, because they're not a lot. So
The reverse is also true. By the way, I was speaking to someone. People coming from Dubai to Bangalore is full of whites, and these people are not tourists. So that's also happening, which is also an indicator.
Yeah. So that is in full force, and I am excited to see what comes out. I think countries which will be first off the block to strike a deal will benefit for sure. Now, if you think about what we have to give and what we get, with India, the complaint historically has been on 2 fronts. First, your import tariffs on certain categories that the US cares for is very high. And second, India, the bigger problem is non-trade barriers, which is non-tariff barriers. So, India gives a lot of subsidies, for example, to its agriculture sector, which makes India's agriculture, or theoretically should make India's agriculture more competitive in the global market versus the Western agriculture, which it still does not. But that's a different podcast episode altogether. Then the second sort of is that, you have a lot of domestic content requirements for us, which makes it harder for us to manufacture or sell to in India. So I think some of these will come off. But some of India's tariffs are also quite nonsensical, to be honest. Like, India grows 0 pecan nuts and macadamia nuts, but and US manufactures a lot of pecan nuts. But we tariff pecan nuts at like 125% rate, which just makes it expensive for the consumer eventually, which wants to consume it, right? Because you anyways don't manufacture it. Or like US has this big thing, we want auto tariffs to go away from you. Just fine, let them do it, because India's auto story is anyways a value engineering, low-cost auto story historically on the volume side, right? Like, which is why you have domestic champions like Maruti, even Honda, Hyundai, all have value engineered their supply chains in India, Tata, Mahindra, everyone. So if they want to sell a Ford Bronco in India with like a gas-guzzling engine, which gives you like 5 kilometers per like liter average, let them do it. People will not buy it, and the markets will vote themselves. But I think, generally speaking, I feel that in certain categories, this will also be net beneficiary to the Indian consumer. And when I say net beneficiary, I mean net deflationary, because a lot of categories which are unfortunately dominated by our national champions and industrial conglomerates have just not done a good job at creating ad scale manufacturing which is cost competitive at global levels. For example, the cement industry. Like India pays probably 10 to 15% higher per ton of cement than what the global spot price is. And that is not because of scale related issues, by the way. That is just because of general inefficiency. Because Adani's now cement group between Ambuja, Lafarge, Holcim, and Adani Cements is probably, I think, the fourth or the fifth largest. I can check that and get back, but it's probably the fourth or the fifth largest in terms of global capacity. But if you're still 15% more expensive than what the global spot price is, then clearly there is some inefficiency in either your technology, process, or distribution, which is giving you some pain, right? Same for the Indian paints industry also, by the way. We think that Asian paints and all these guys are best in class, etc., etc. They're not. Sherwin-Williams is far cheaper. AkzoNobel is far cheaper than what the Indian paints are. So generally, I feel that if you do this, then you will bring down the inflation for the Indian consumer, which should then reduce the interest rate requirements that you have in India and spur another sort of leg of growth. And I feel this is also a very interesting time to be doing this, because the China plus one story that we were promised post-COVID did not play out. Right? That market share went to Vietnam, Bangladesh, Brazil, etc., all of these countries, which were basically China's ancillaries. And while people laugh about the simplicity of Trump's formula while calculating tariffs, I think in essence it does the job. If you take out the tail cases of that island with only penguins and Lesotho and Rwanda type of countries getting slapped with high tariffs, it broadly mimics of what the China and China sphere of the world is, and versus what the US and the Western alliance now looks like. Right? It's clear that we are entering in that alliance sort of an era. And again, if you trace back history a little bit and see what happened during Cold War, India, for political reasons, was a non-aligned country, which served us well from a global stature perspective. But probably from an economic perspective, we lost out a little bit, because the guys who actually aligned with one side, like say the US, the East Asian tigers, essentially like China, sorry, not China, but I would say South Korea, Japan, Thailand, Taiwan, all of these countries, which were in the US sphere of influence, they grew like crazy, which we could not, right? So I think there is merit in thinking through this more carefully on whether being non-aligned was right or not, and whether it is going to be right in the future, especially now that China is both a political as well as an economic adversary anyways. So you might as well lean all in on China and try to create that manufacturing base and setup that you need to, and become sort of the export factory to US and the allied world.
Hey, Tushar, I actually wanted to double click on one thing that you said, which is very interesting, which is it becomes deflationary because you allow categories like paints and cements to kind of come in. And I think these are all capex heavy, right? You cannot import cement. You'll have to set up, like whoever has to do it has to set up plants in India or acquire assets from. It's surprising that Adani, despite buying power from Adani Power, is still inefficient on cement. Like I would find that extremely difficult to believe. Like,
Yeah, a lot of it is because of capital goods machinery. Because your capital goods that you have in India is so expensive to import, which is the other area where it all becomes more efficient, right? Or you're stuck with the second generation equipment that you get out of BHL or HAL, or it's not best in class global machinery that you have essentially.
got it. That's where the inefficiency is.
That's where
Because then that will basically mean that if the moment AkzoNobel sets up, or some global cement company sets up, that technology immediately finds its way. These are guys who are great at just hiring top production talent and quickly getting it integrated into. You suddenly see Adani kind of become big, because
you put a you give them a kick and they will do well, right? Like essentially, everyone sort of gets their act together. And if you think about, let's say, the industries where India's manufacturing actually has done really well, like what are those sectors, right? Auto comps, which has done really well from an export orientation perspective. Pharma, where Indian exports have done really well, right? And the common thread amongst all of these sectors is that there were global guys who came, gave us technology, gave us a little bit of like know-how, technical talent, etc. And then the domestic champions sort of rose. And those domestic champions, if you look at in these categories, are not necessarily your large Indian conglomerates. These are probably like second, third generation Indian single family businesses, rather than like having some of these large conglomerates. So I think now, obviously, if the large conglomerates sort of suffer, that is bad for the stock markets. But you take the good with the bad, where if you can get a large manufacturing job-based setup and you can get low inflation, then it's okay. You can live with a slightly poor performing stock market also at the same time.
Yeah, but why will it be poor? Because you're only looking at the index, no? See, if you look at the index of the top 30, top 50 stocks, they may not grow that well, but they're anyway not doing anything. If Unilever is growing at 4% for the last 10 years, it's like the most underperforming consumer stock. I don't know why.
I agree with you, Revant. I think I'm talking about at an index level, because that sort of is the bellwether of where the foreign capital flows and where all the programmatic capital essentially flows and how it acts. So I'm just using that as a bellwether. But yeah, of course, will there be single stock opportunities to buy? For sure.
More than that, I think.
Think about it.
Move ahead. No, sorry, just to see, we sort of get infatuated on looking at the top 30 stocks, which is Sensex, and the top 50 stocks, which is Nifty, and say this is the stock market, this is how the country, like, it's almost like this is how the country is doing. But that's a very incorrect representation. If you see that what we are saying, if you look at the overall startup ecosystem and how there's enough innovation happening, and then they are getting listed. And I think that episode with Kashyap was a really eye-opener for me when we realized that $200 billion of market cap additionally will come into a $4 trillion market. It's still so less, right? Like, we need more innovation. And for innovation, you need to free up, मतलब हाथ बांध के रखोगे तो फिर innovation कैसे होगा? Effectively, what you're saying is the tariffs may help American companies sell more in India, which is what they want to do. But I'm sure it will also help Indian companies innovate. I mean, it's almost like
it will force them to.
It will force them.
It will force them to. Yeah, it's a forcing mechanism. Which is why, look, देखो यार, India में तो Revant वैसे भी reforms don't happen proactively, right? They happen reactively. 91, happened because it was reactive in that sense. And while it did a lot, it did probably, and maybe at that time it was the right choice to make. People say that it did not go far enough, right? And now is the time for you to like think about taking it to the next level, right? Indian agri will probably not open up, and none of that will not be a part of the trade deal because of political compulsion and whatnot. But I think for the rest of the economy, it's a really interesting opportunity. And I think we have to just sort of let go of that hang up of saying that, oh, this is like a US company and I'm working for a US company in a manufacturing setup and they own and they're creating market cap in India, because that is also not true anymore, right? Like LG ka US, like India unit is listing in India also. Obviously, you're giving out royalty mechanisms and stuff like that to back to the parent company, but you have to keep them interested, right? If you want them to do something which is efficient and top notch.
इसमें सब में लेकिन what you said ना Tushar, if you look at the capital goods heavy industries, like look at Motherson Sumi, look at Maruti doing it with Suzuki. ये India में maybe because it takes a lot of time to build, let's say, an engine, right? A lot of investment goes in. It takes 25 years, or that amount of time to come up with a new engine. While theoretically you are saying we are at that moment where we should be innovating, we should be owning that part of the value chain also, where innovation actually happens here. One probably thing is reforms, I think, but those things usually take a lot of time, right? In terms of, and again, we might be at that stage where 2021, 22 में तो बोल रहा ना कि we had an opportunity, and then Brazil and Vietnam, everyone moved faster, and then we are again struggling. What is the con side of this?
I'll tell you what the difference is, though. Just on that point, I'll tell you what the difference is. Because at that time, the pattern was the same. We lost because we created an economic wall with China, because it was a political and economic adversary. Whereas Vietnam said, boss, come set a factory in my place, give me the capital, give me the technical talent and know-how, and I will become a transshipment hub effectively to the US, right? And which is why we lost market share. We were still losing market share to China only, just in a different sort of cloth. I think now those backstops are also getting stopped at the cost of effectively the US consumer. But that is probably not our problem to solve, right? But those backstops are also now getting filled up. And now the question is that can you move, like you said, fast enough? And which I think broadly boils down to how quickly can we reform the ease of doing business? Yeah. Where we need to do a cut/burn thing now again, which is why I compare this with the 91 moment, because that is the speed at which reform needs to happen now.
And do you see, let's say, venture capital going towards these traditional sectors to do this innovation? Has that?
Yeah, I'll share again something interesting which I found was on one of my GPT searches on one of those long sunny walks in New York, which is, but basically, look, the funda here is that I was looking at categories, which are the largest category exports to US from India. What is India's share of exports? So basically, what is India's wallet share with US? And which are the other three countries which sort of supply to the US, right? In green are the categories where India's share is like less than 5%. And the next biggest country are China and allies. So if you see electrical machinery and equipment, which is like phones, electronics, etc., China is the biggest one, then Mexico, then Vietnam, right? So China and Vietnam to put together is 40%. And India is only 2%. Now, that is up for India to take, because of the tariff situation, right? And that is what is happening, right? Apple said that, in the next quarter, whatever we sell in the US, most of it will be coming from India. Similarly, apparel, if you look together as a category, India is probably 3% of US's imports. But who are the next guys? China, Vietnam, Bangladesh. Same for chemicals as an industry, same for like iron and steel. I don't know how much iron and steel will play out, but I think these three categories are just like up for us to take. Startups, non-startups, like everyone could potentially be doing this, and these are more like labor-intensive sectors than capital-intensive sectors anyways to begin with. What you need to solve, however, is the column J here, which is, India is sourcing a lot of imports from China as well in each of these categories. So that reorg of supply chain is what is the real sort of question mark on how you do that, how efficiently and quickly can you do that. But this is the forcing mechanism for you to be doing this. So I think if we can solve ease of doing business meaningfully, that I think is the real opportunity in front of us right now.
I think it's the shift of value will be most important, yeah, because end of the day, now a lot of this will come down to how much supply you already put up. Like for example, you look at petchem, you look at glue, adhesives, you look at lithium-ion batteries. I think China has just kind of nailed the supply on this, so that value will continue to sit there. But how much value can you add on top of that at the next level in any of these categories, let's say electronics or whatever? It will probably come down to how quickly we're able to
Yeah,
move.
also though I think Shantanu, because of this happening, right, China का capacity utilization तो पक्का कम होगा. So just because they have the capacity does not mean they have the demand.
तो but
और
cost कम होता है ना उसके वजह. They are very much on the left side of the cost curve, na. So then
that's fair. But अगर आपका factory चल ही नहीं रहा है, utilization हो ही नहीं रहा है, तो you will start moving up the cost curve anyways, right? Because
Either that or dumping will happen.
Cost as much across as many units. So what you have to believe is the fact that these China tariffs stay in a relatively worse off situation versus the rest of the world, which forces China to move up the cost curve.
Yeah.
And India is also able to move in lockstep very quickly at the same time. So that is, but that is the opportunity in front of us, right? Like some people will do it, some people won't. Some categories will do well, some we won't. But yeah, fight to marna banta hai.
And do you think it is in our interest as economically to have countries list their India subsidiaries separately, like LG or Hyundai, which was recent, Colgate, which has been going on to 30-35 years, is a public company in India with its own, which kind of have a more Indian shareholding, and then that kind of makes it easier as opposed to China, where it's much harder to do that.
Yeah, I think locally, right? I think the SEBI and the RBI are probably the two best regulators we have in the country, right? SEBI is only focus is to make markets more and more transparent and more sort of consumer protectionist, obviously, but healthier essentially. Like Indian public markets are quite healthy, and if we are in a good spot, we get lots of foreign capital anyways. It keeps on going up and down, but domestic capital itself is taking care of things. So if you have companies which have significant economic interests in India, why should the Indian stockholder also not get benefits out of that? And why should that not unlock value for those companies also? So I don't see any long-term problems or implications. I think there's also a little bit of a opportunism here, which is that people are seeing that, my stock in Korea trades at 5x PE versus my stock in India trades at 35x PE. So let me do that. That is, again, boils out to demand and supply. And it's not like that is the only reason that people have been doing it, right? Like you said, Colgate has been in India for the last 35 years. So if on the margins, it makes a foreign guy more interested in looking at the Indian consumer and Indian capital markets and Indian job market more seriously, by all means.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with you. I think we've been in a very protectionist environment for a long time in a lot of these BAU sectors like auto, apparel, but I agree with Chirag as well that it's not going to be easy for these guys to just come in and sell. They will need an Indian partner. Like if you see most of the apparel brands that come into India, they partner with Aditya Birla or a Tata or a
Reliance order.
Right? So phenomenal opportunity for a lot more. I mean, and the Indian consumer is clearly showing that they're hungry for more, right? So if we can actually get these brands in, and it just befuddles my mind as to why the iPhone is still more expensive here than Dubai when we manufacture most of it, right? So, or if Tesla doesn't come in, BYD is anyway going to take the market. Like, I don't think it's going to be Mahindra and Mahindra because BYD has already got an entry. Now they're putting up that manufacturing plant, I think, somewhere in South India. I think Hyderabad or near somewhere in Telangana, right? So everyone knows that you would rather align with the US, which is, I think we were always a little skeptical. Depending on who comes to power, I think it becomes a little question mark whether we should align or not. But clearly, if the economic advisory is China, and anyway, the government has always done all things possible to make sure that cheap Chinese imports don't come into the country. But yeah, it's high time we opened up and started innovating a lot more on all these sectors. And it would be a great thing. I think one of the good parts of Kashyap's report, the Rainmaker Group's report, also spoke about how Indian companies are now playing at a global stage, whether it's an Oyo, whether it's a Lenskart. whether it's
Ultra
Fresh, all of these companies going IPO are actually, I mean, it's going to be a big theme for Indian companies now to go global and actually play at the global stage. I know in previous one of the episodes, Chirag, we have discussed that the probability of success is much lower because in the end, our ability to win enterprise SaaS deals in the US is going to be harder. But at least a more globalization, at least in terms of innovation and us playing these large markets at a very fair term is going to help both sides per se for sure.
इस SaaS companies में तो फिर भी we have seen Revant that there have been successes. I get a little bit worried when I see, let's say, Zomato pulling back from UAE, even Urban Company pulling back from UAE. We saw, I think Rebel has also shut down Indonesia. So is there more to read? I know it's difficult, but consumer companies are also after investing time, money, resources.
Yeah, I think the difference is it's much harder. Like you've seen in your business, right? In the end, if you are a amazing product, let's say on WhatsApp, which technically e-commerce and leveraging WhatsApp for e-commerce is very similar in the UK or in the US compared to like India. Right? So you don't need a big tweak. Whereas from a consumer company, like we really would struggle to relate because the brand cannot change, right? Like Urban Company has been in the Middle East for 5 years, but what they are offering, the way they built for the Indian consumer, the same brand may not be relatable to the Middle East consumer as well, right?
It's like basically making a new company. You have some capabilities which you have learned in India, but it's like making a new company.
So in fact, if you see all the three examples I gave, none of them have grown internationally on their own. They've actually acquired companies. So Lenskart acquired Owndays, which is one of the largest Japanese eyewear retailers, and they actually are taking Owndays, which was already there in a lot of these countries, and expanding that. Captain Fresh acquired companies in the Middle East and the US. Oyo acquired companies in Europe and US. And it's very like you are managing those brands and companies. You are not taking your own brand there, which is the feedback that I also got when we said we want to do international. And
but Revant, India में तो उल्टा होता है. We get Domino's in, it works. We get KFC in, it works.
क्योंकि हमें
नहीं बट चिराग वो भी बट आई थिंक टू बी फेयर वो हम लोग ब्रांड तो कर लेते हैं बट वो प्रोडक्ट कितना लोकलाइज होता है यार.
That's true.
दाल मखनी पिज्जा बिक रहा है आजकल मार्केट में मतलब वो
That's true and काफी long भी लेते हैं यार. I think we are discussing about Domino's, which is a like कितने साल हो गए यार, at least
1990.
And yeah, Domino's is also owned by like Sapphire, like which is an Indian guy running it for so many years. It's a franchise business at the end of the day. Right?
Jubilant runs it.
Jubilant, not Sapphire.
Jubilant runs it, and they pay 5% royalty to Domino's in the US. But I think, I mean, see, in the end, we are going from a developing country to hopefully a developed country soon. So the aspirations are more towards what the developed countries have, right? In that sense. So I think brand-wise, though, it's going to be very hard for you to charge a premium in Europe, for example, saying Indian brand, unless you're selling Ayurveda, which is what most people will do.
और you're saying Revant कि I'm just thinking कि India से जब बाहर जाते हैं तो क्यों नहीं हो पाता है? Is it just that our talent density is low? You require the same people to go there, reinvent the menu, do value engineering there. Then it becomes a little bit of okay. We are building.
Made in India is not as premium as so everyone knows. Made in China is high quality and low cost. But I think even in the US, there's a lot of anti-China कि यार made in China तो हम नहीं खरीदेंगे. Okay? But it's not like made in India is that good. For example, we play in supplements. The highest perception of quality is European. The European standards are so strict. Like I was just discussing with someone, right? Like protein is the big rage now. And in protein, everybody went from sucralose and say, oh, this is bad sugar. Then people went to stevia. And now monk fruit is the current favorite, right? You would be surprised. I don't know if you will be surprised, but the European FDA standards have not recognized monk fruit as a additive to food, right? Their standards are much stricter. They will not take one certificate and say, chalo, theek hai, ek certificate mein aa gaya, theek hai. Like their testing standards are, of course, low. They're also lazy, but very, very particular on what goes inside the body, right? Whereas the US standards are more capitalistic, chalo फटाफट करते हैं करके. Indian standards तो छोड़ ही दो आप करके, right? So, and this everyone knows, right? So the perception of Indian products will be that यार ये सस्ते में बनते हैं और इतना कोई regulation नहीं है तो पता नहीं अच्छा होगा कि नहीं करके. Let's say, right? Unless we are doing something like jewelry, where people will say no, very high quality because Indians love high quality jewelry. That's been our forte for so long. Or even, for example, ethnic wear, right? Like we will have a right to win in some categories that people think that we are the best at. And I don't think it's beauty products or supplements or even electronics for that matter, right? Like if you make
But Revant, I think the companies which we are
Revant,
discussing,
I don't. Sorry, Sri, one second. On this now, I think earlier now the whole perception of how a country manufactures was a long cycle where a critical mass of people would have to put their hand on the product and then some collective opinion would be formed. And China over the last 30 years has gone from cheap low cost stuff to high quality low cost stuff. That has happened over 30 years. But today there is like that time has now become crunched fully. So now because of social media and people just putting stuff out there, I don't know whether you saw what happened to Hermes and Louis Vuitton manufacturing when Chinese decided to tell the whole world. The whole world now knows what the difference is and क्या quality है.
में
So
टेमू पे मिल जाएगा आपको बैग वो Hermes का.
हाँ, अभी तो for example we just made 25,000 trimmers 2 days back on our line in India. And we are trying to see कि क्या फर्क है in India and so with slightly 5% cost higher है. But I am not able to personally, despite owning Bombay shaving company, I am not able to personally make out कि कौन सा trimmer India बना है कौन सा बाहर है. It's a very well made product. So if we are able, now the job for us is we have to make the product same quality, then you have to bring the cost down, and then you have to tell the world कि make in India और बढ़िया है. And then the time will kind of come. Hopefully, in more categories than jewelry and saris and textile, we will create a reputation that we make good quality stuff. And I think
Yeah, I would
it's our job
also
to do that.
have a different contention, right? Which is that I don't think that there are godsends on what certain countries do and what we should assume what the associations are with that, right? I think what the US consumer does is it rewards like great products very richly by paying a premium, by buying in droves, etc., etc. And I would say like an example for that, for example, is Ultrahuman, right? Like manufacturers in India largely does not play a lot on the cost element at all, is almost as pricey as the Aura ring is, right? Opened up new distribution channels, the product was at par, and is now like a reasonably not a reason, actually a very large business built on the export story out of India, selling to big box retailers in India, right? Sorry, in the US.
US, yeah.
So my point is, I think कि वो वाला time भी अब थोड़ा चला गया है, where we have certain associations of certain countries with certain products and ingredients. वो है just in certain quality, certain categories, right? Like you said, Revant, शिलाजीत में हो सकता है, कई आयुर्वेदा में होगा, थोड़ा बहुत teas वगैरह में होगा, थोड़ा बहुत coffee में होगा. But I think generally speaking, if we can get the right product out, then the consumer over time rewards you for sure.
No, fair point.
And the time is now much lesser.
Yeah, and the time is lesser because we also have the talent now, roughly
Yeah,
speaking.
there's two different things. What you're talking about is building so premium, you're building for the top 1% of India, so automatically works for the US, Europe, Middle East as well, which is what Ultrahuman did. What I was saying is existing businesses will not be able to take their, because that was the question Chirag asked, right? कि आपने इंडिया में PMF ले आए हो, बट कंज्यूमर में ऐसा क्यों नहीं हो रहा है कि आप डायरेक्टली वो ब्रांड या वो प्रोडक्ट ले पा जा रहे, बिकॉज इन द एंड दैट्स आपने वो परसेप्शन डे वन से नहीं बनाया. वेयर अल्ट्रा ह्यूमन फ्रॉम डे वन वाज 25,000 का रिंग है भाई, इंडिया में तुम्हारी औकात नहीं है तो मत लो, राइट? इट्स लाइक बिल्डिंग एन एप्पल आईफोन आउट ऑफ इंडिया, राइट?
नहीं, बट रेवंत, मेरा थोड़ा सा इसमें न्यूआंस्ड एंगल है कि यू लुक एट द थ्री एग्जांपल्स व्हिच आई गेव, जोमेटो, अर्बन कंपनी एंड रेबल फूड्स, राइट? आई एम श्योर दैट अर्बन कंपनी इज डूइंग व्हाट लेट्स से दे वर डूइंग इन यूएई वाज लोकलाइज्ड, राइट? अदरवाइज इट वुड फ्लाई. Similarly, I know that Rebel Foods had brands which were local, right? For serving bowls, serving this Mediterranean cuisine. तो वहां पर मतलब is what I'm thinking is these are technology first companies, trying to do things. Most of these manufacturing is not happening in India.
Yeah.
Some of that will be getting sourced from India, but still I think there is more to it. From what I'm understanding,
it should be like services versus product companies, because the success stories that we are thinking about are all product export businesses, whereas the examples that you are thinking about are all services businesses essentially.
So I know for at least, well, like Middle East works great. It's actually a beautiful business. Indonesia, see, every country is very nuanced. For services businesses now, हर country के अपने बहुत nuances है. Like Indonesia did well post COVID, but it seemed like false PMF because Gojek and Grab were at it, like like the Swiggy Zomato fight.
Yeah,
they were funding so much discounts that you got to 25 million ARR, but the day Gojek had to go public after becoming that Gojek and Tokopedia merged and funding stopped, the discounts went away, and suddenly business would crash, right? And now you're saddled with 25 kitchens, but you don't have the turnover in the kitchens to sustain that cost, right? And Indonesia as a market, internet economy was all propped up with venture dollars, like, and discounts. Like the entire market has gone kaput. I think the venture ecosystem in India is still okay, though it's going to contract a little. Maybe it'll do 10-20%. But I think Indonesia would have contracted 50%, right, Tushar?
Yeah.
Uh,
More. I would
I
say
don't
like
think
growth
it-
capital is non-existent now. Growth capital is non-existent.
right? So very separate problem. You see, in fact, I've met the Middle East head. I think they are at it. It's just that Saudi is very protectionist. UAE is not that big a market. And look at UC in India, right? It's like 1,000 crores after like 8-9 years. It's a beautiful business. It's monopolistic. But उतने ही services करते हैं. Like I don't know if I have the chart, I'll put it up, where the high frequency use cases, which are largely salon and beauty, are not that high AOV. So your take
Yeah.
rates, even if they're 35% in that, you're not making a lot of dollar. Whereas the big dollar services, like a painting the house or something like that, is like once a year max. So there is a massive TAM constraint on a business like you see in a market like UAE, जहाँ पे मुश्किल से 1 million लोग हैं.
मुझे तो ये इंटरेस्टिंग क्वेश्चन पूछना है, तुषार भी आया हुआ है कि अर्बन क्लैब पे कि यार ये बिजनेस में आई एम श्योर VCs वुड हैव सेड डे वन की टाइम नहीं, राइट? टाइम नहीं है. वन, इट इज वेरी हार्ड टू डू सर्विसेज लाइक ट्रू सर्विसेज. If I look at a Zomato, it's like only they have to manage logistic guide, which also is hard, but इसके अंदर तो बहुत ही hard है, right? You are treating something personal, then there is this intermediation issue real, right? If I like someone, I will take their personal number and reach out. I'm sure, how would love to know that. I'm sure at some point of time you would have seen the company. ये सब issues कैसे solve हुए? I have seen that, by the way, in multiple global companies also, where VCs को लगता है यार ये तो TAM नहीं है, right? This is very hard to execute, etc., etc. How have you seen the journey on this?
I think people got the TAM question wrong, is how I would answer this. Like, I think people who took the early, and which is why you'll see, like, UC is not a very heavily funded company from a growth stage perspective. The early guys who took a bet on the team and their ability to execute, etc., and their vision, कि चलो कुछ नहीं होगा तो कुछ और कर लेंगे, and which is what the cap table makeup also is, right? Like, actually, the very, very patient and high quality investor who takes a people bet at an early stage, right? And now they are being rewarded for that, of course. But I think when it came to growth stages in like 2020, 19, 21, I don't think this was a company where people were like running after like crazy, unless you were the name of an animal in your fund's name, right? Essentially.
But what would change? Let's say if you were, because clearly the company is like one, as Revant also mentioned, it has a definite moat. It's not an easy business to build. It's now at scale. In my view, it's a good compounding machine. We'll continue to execute. What would have changed in 2021 for somebody to have that kind of a view? I know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. TAM is one of those things. But
literally in this case,
growth is, growth at this scale, I won't say it's like crazy. The growth that UC is giving you. So I don't think people were wrong in that. It's not because again, capital has opportunity cost, right? I put it here versus I put it here, and at that point, like if you just look at this, let me just.
Can you zoom on it, Tushar?
Yes, let me do that. Extend up, please. If you just look at this revenue growth from FY 22, 23, 24, it's growing like 30% at a $50 million revenue, like $50-60 million revenue scale. It's good, but it's not something that people will be jumping up and down for, because at the same time there are other companies that you will be going after anyway.
But this is just as a nuance. Till FY24, it was largely services. The reason they're growing 40% in FY25 because they launched product, and now I think they'll realize that India में scale लाना है अगर, तो you will have to attach products and services to make sure that that revenue compounds fast.
And उस टाइम पे कोई product का कहानी नहीं था, तो you were underwriting basically a TAM which you were not fully sold on, and the company was growing 30% in that TAM. So you were like, okay, that broadly concurs with my conclusion on the TAM, and the company was like barely profitable or not profitable at the time. So you're like, there are better uses of my capital as a growth stage investor to go after. Now that they have found a little bit of a growth lever in the product story, that we'll see how that shapes up. But that could be interesting, right? Like locks, water purifiers, etc., etc. We'll see how that shapes up.
I'm sure उसमें gross margin कम होगा, right?
Gross margin तो 25% gross margin है, and which is why I'm actually a little bit. I think my sense is that this might be the peak gross margins that UC can actually have, because if the mix of product business goes up, then your gross margin as a company itself will come down, right? And which is why I am not yet in the camp where I say that urban company is also going to be a compounder on the profitability side for a long time, because we just don't have that evidence yet. Like even this year, while they're claiming that we have 29%, while they're claiming that we have 29% PAT, if you look the difference between their reported EBITDA and their PAT, that's basically coming from a tax shield that they have by bringing forward the tax.
Yeah, you can remove that, but still at least they've gone from a massive negative 80% to now a पॉजिटिव वन
यार इस साल ना सब जूस कर दिया इन्होंने, इस साल सब जूस हो गया। मतलब इस साल जो है टैक्स शील्ड भी ले लिया है।
Let's
एक
take
सेकंड
1% as the EBITDA steady state. Let's say, you're saying I don't see that 1% going to 10%.
Yeah, I doubt that happens
That
consistently over a long
product comes in, because I think all of us focus on gross margin, because everybody, like, traditional wisdom says high gross margin will enable you to have higher profitability. One of the biggest advantages that UC has is a very captive, loyal base, right? And native, I don't know, I actually would love to see कि native की sales हो कहाँ रही है, Blinkit Amazon पे हो रही है कि UC apps पे हो रही है करके।
I am glad you brought this up, Revant,
हाँ,
because I have this another beautiful chart waiting for you to see, which is the NTV retention on the services business.
okay.
If you will see vertically, post-COVID, cohorts have gotten meaningfully worse. Retention has come off, right? If you see
1 year retention, you're saying. So if I acquired a consumer in 2017,
yeah,
2018, I almost had the same consumer come
Yeah.
back at least once. Whereas in 2023, who I acquired, 2024 में वो सिर्फ 75% लोग वापस आए.
correct.
Okay.
Let me just, so that it's easy to read. Now my point is कि ऐसा नहीं कि company बहुत तेज grow कर रहा है, that your cohort size has increased meaningfully,
You see,
right?
this
So
is not that high because transacting user base is not like growing very meaningfully.
growing very quickly, right? So which is why your retention is not high, which then again has a question mark on your captive user base. Which is why I say that UC is a good company, not a great company.
But tell me this. Let's take a step back.
And this is only services. Just to clarify, this is only services, right?
Hanji, this is only services, and this is India services, because like global services like this, then
You
10%
see
of
a
revenue started bottom line.
reason
But why would you not assume that? Why would you not assume that if the 2017 user is smiling upward, the cohorts are smiling upward, it won't happen for users acquired later on?
यार अब देख लो ना, मतलब vertically तो cohorts have gotten worse, right? Like if you see 2017 in year 5 versus 2020 in year 5, that is meaningfully worse. So year 5 तक तो at least it should have been at some level, right? Or look at year 2 itself, right? Like year 2 was used to be COVID वाला year हटा के 84%, now you're down to 75%. So while it might smile up, it is smiling up from a smaller base now versus what the earlier cohorts were doing.
Just a quick here. This is just user coming back in the full year, or is this revenue retention?
This is revenue retention, NTV retention, right? Basically the GMV retention, essentially, if you were to think about it.
Transaction volume, yeah, correct.
Transaction volume, GMV retention. And this only, like if you just transact even once a year, you come here, right? You are
Yeah, but I
essentially
think it's a function of see, we look at it monthly. In fact, just recently one of our board members said, yeah, quarterly दिखाओ करके, because इतना कोई transact नहीं कर रहा है, हर महीने नहीं आ रहे लोग, quarterly करके, right? Now, one of the things in yearly is we don't know कि year 1 में जो 100% है ना, वो base क्या है. Like, for example, you want to look at the potential LTV of this customer, which is why you're saying that, oh, the cohorts are dropping. But what if the CAC is so low that the LTV is already recovered 1x plus हो गया year 1 में? Then everything is मक्खन ना आगे.
नहीं वो हो गया होगा Revant, I'm sure, because their marketing spends consistently have been between 15 to 17 odd %.
Which is outstanding, right? If you think about it, like a 17% marketing cost
Of revenue, right?
Right, but even wouldn't it mean that it's a premium service? They will like run out of people.
Exactly. And तभी
New
आपको जो है वो
customers.
वो तो 8 साल पहले भी टाइम का ही क्वेश्चन था यार. 6 मिलियन यूजर.
पर अगर ये यूजेज अच्छा रहता जो ईयर 1 में 2017 में दिख रहा है,
हाँ,
then it's like fantastic ना. Even if you run out of users, these users are coming back.
are going to take you home. यहाँ पे वो वाला इशू नहीं है.
यार मुझे लग रहा है कि इंडिया जैसे प्रीमियमाइज हो रहा है ना, अब धीरे धीरे ये बढ़ना ही चाहिए. लाइक, and this is also base. The first users will always be more sticky than the आगे वाले user. Like,
have you guys used the native lock or a
मजा आ गया ऐसे
native?
तुषार मजा आ गया इस चार्ट पे. शांतनु go ahead.
Have you guys used a native lock or a native water purifier? I have both in the house. Abhiraj lives around the corner, तो मेरे को भेजता रहता है. I never takes money for it. So take this as a biased consumer of free products, but it is significantly better than what I had before. And now I have 2 AquaGuards in the house. It's ironic I call the product by Eureka Foam's name, and it's an Advent company, so and there's an attachment there. But the product is truly distinctive, and they've done a lot of small things. So I love, like personally, I love when people do the right innovation on products, right? So they will have multiple features. The notification comes on the Urban Company app. The moment someone rings the doorbell, the notification comes on the app कि कोई तो है, तो मैं उस पे देखता हूँ कैमरा पे कौन आया घर पे. There are a lot of things that, for example, the competition will not have. I feel 70,000 service providers. I think if you look at Urban Company in decades, like if you look at them at the end of the second decade, I think 90% of the market cap that they will have in the end of second decade will have to get added in the next decade. So I agree with you that kind of this is where the S curve will begin. But I feel that 70,000 service providers, they've built a brand moat of trust. Frankly, what Chirag was saying, they have people entering your home and almost treating you when you are naked in the case of massage. That level of trust is happening at a certain scale, which is insane. I don't think any service provider does it. And third is in this native universe, there are very, very slow and non-innovative brands which are large, which have been built out by feet on street distribution, which is ready to get disrupted. Like Aquaguard has been sold feet on street, yeah, like door to door jaake kiya hua hai. It's going to get disrupted because now you're suddenly able to buy it on and then the whole element of changing the filters, I'm sure they'll get into
तो
vacuum
सर्विस
cleaners,
इनकम भी
they'll get
रहेगा
into
ना एक्चुअली
20,000.
उसमें स्टेडी कंपाउंडिंग
100% यार.
इनकम रहेगा ना
आप तीनों ने कब किया Aquaguard को ये सर्विस? याद ही नहीं होगा
तो
अपने को.
अभी
But
किया
मैं
मैंने
Shantanu, one
and I
the
was
question is,
pained as to how expensive it was. $1,700.
मैं उसी पॉइंट पे आ रहा था रेवंत कि shouldn't they be selling this as a service, software as a service
It
types?
is.
वैसे
They're in
It is
subscription
very
nature.
much that.
अच्छा
तो यार
subscription है.
हाँ
That is what native will be. They'll give you the product and then urban company पे आप उसका सर्विस ले सकते
उसका
हो.
एम्स या बर्न कंपनी भी करोगे वो वैसा ही
Yeah,
रहेगा.
but when you are buying Shantanu these native locks, you didn't buy, but is it monthly subscription or is one time expense?
तो वन टाइम बाय देन दे विल गिव यू लाइक क्या बोलते हैं उसको बैटरी चेंज करने के लिए नोटिफिकेशन आ जाएगा कि आपका बैटरी चेंज करना है बिकॉज़ इट्स कनेक्टेड टू देयर सर्वर्स और व्हाटएवर इट इज. So there's a very
इसमें
distinctive
एन्युइटी
क्या
इनकम
बोलते हैं.
बहुत आएगा रे इसमें
But where I'm struggling with this is that should I view this as a growth stock or should I view this as a compounder stock? I think it's neither right now.
व्हाई नॉट कंपाउंडर क्यों नहीं बोलोगे आप इसको
यार मतलब अभी इस साल जो था बहुत जूस कर लिया इन्होंने मार्जिन बाय डेफरिंग लीज पेमेंट बाय सब कर आगे मतलब बहुत द इट्स अ वर्क ऑफ आर्ट द नोट्स टू अकाउंटिंग and if you like truly like try and adjust you a small thing, right? For example,
do we have any idea as to what is the potential listing valuation that they are expecting?
Indicated is 2.5 to 3 billion.
Yeah.
So
2.5 billion was the commentary I was hearing
$4
on
million
that.
revenue पे with barely profitability,
Yeah,
2.5 billion expectation है. I thought they would expect lower
I think it might settle down a bit lower even, but I think expectation वो है.
because at that valuation, why would they reduce the primary raise? There is no reason for them to do that.
There's no reason to do that. Yeah. Now, if you see I just did this like little bit back of the envelope math itself. कि what they were qualifying as revenue and then there are like other expenses के भी others में जाके अगर आप देखोगे तो you'll find कि there are incentives given which should be ideally netted out from your top line. There should be like pest control वालों को जो पैसे देते थे professional services, like those things should be netted out of top line, right? And वो सब adjust करो तो scale is even lower, so your multiple optically looks even higher. So I think ये थोड़ा मतलब juice कर लिया इस साल जितना करना था. And like if you see here, this is the Indian consumer services business. The consumer services business on a percentage basis, common size between FY25 and FY22, right? Roughly at the same level only. And अगर आप वो 4% को अगर actually adjust करोगे, that will actually be negative 5-7%, something like that.
Do you think there's not more
that also-
like आप ये बोल रहे हो कि सर्विसेज बिजनेस में और जूस नहीं है, इतना ही कंट्रीब्यूशन बनेगा.
हाँ, and वो मध्यम ग्रो करेगा, चलता रहेगा, थोड़ा बहुत ये लोग कॉस्ट ऑप्टिमाइज कर लेंगे आगे जाके. It will become like a 2-3% EBITDA business
And
which
that's why
will
I
keep
think
on
I can't underwrite this as a compounding stock, but if I have to underwrite this as a growth stock, then I need to see more products like
What are the growth
out
levers?
and one more year of like कि native का service income is becoming like a decent
Correct.
line item. Lock का
And I tell you, other big takeaway that I've had in looking at some of these companies which are going public, the DRHP actually tells you a lot more if you try and read between the lines. Like if you look at the use of fresh issue, it is for like cloud expenses and lease payments for office. If it was a company which was sure of the growth levers it was going after, that would have been the larger area of investment.
But सब लोग तो
Not like
corporate purpose ही डाल देते हैं. Nobody ever says that.
नहीं तो वो आप देखिए ना, वो आपकी इशू का खाली 20% रेज है, right?
Shantanu,
That
I
is-
guess you got one more. I feel you're going to get a call from Abhiraj.
I'm sorry. Anyway, and try to take an objective view around these
No,
things.
it's a
I'm sorry
very
if I'm
objective
taking
and fair
trouble
view.
for you guys.
No, this is very important.
The
yeah.
view
This
is
very
fair.
important. I think I'll tell you very frankly, I also knowing Abhiraj and Varun very well. These are the most missionary founders I have seen in the last 10 years personally. I genuinely they have built I admire their company truly because I think every time I interact with them, there is just so much like if I tell them some feedback on WhatsApp, there's immediate need to like get better. कि और क्या करे, कैसे करे. Then when you talk to them, you can see almost a spongy attitude to learning. So this will be hugely beneficial for them. I think that they're very like
So I
that way
think
very hungry.
from whatever limited interactions I've also had with them, I mean, it's clearly a company which is built on great perseverance, the right building blocks, etc., etc. And we are standing at a point in time where we are taking a call, and I'm sure they'll prove us wrong.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is also potential. You're right. So for example,
Yeah.
I think Tam, see, there is some romance to doing really hard things well, right? Small Tam, very complex, matrix. Like Uber has to take a guy from one point to the other point. Usme, like it's so complicated. Zomato is different restaurants, but a guy from a restaurant to home. इसमें तो कितना कॉम्प्लेक्स है यार, उसमें उन्होंने अच्छा किया है. So I hope hopefully they sweated now. That's the idea.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting is though, I'll tell you where it comes down to also, which I found unique. I was benchmarking this with other quote unquote staffing companies in the white collar space, like a Team Lease and a Quest and others. And they, funnily enough, they are also all at 2-3% EBITDA. So that the framing then is another question or thought process to think about, like a more moated staffing business.
But I think my view is that may be the first 10-year story. But if I look at the potential BMX in just the water purifier space, everybody's like a 2,000 crore revenue, right?
Yeah.
So how someone like an Attenborough came in and disrupted a very boring segment of fans that Crompton Greaves and Bajaj, etc. were playing and has got a 2,000 crore revenue in just fans. And now they're trying to do it mixer. Mixer maybe 50 साल से लोग खेल रहे हैं 2,000 करोड़ कर रहे हैं. All you need to do is 200, 300, 400 करोड़ revenue ले लो यार, कोई टेंशन नहीं है. So if they could potentially, and I was just seeing an AquaGuard, Elica, Unilever has got into water purifiers, and water is a big issue in India, right? So it's not going away any point of time. So I see a potential 500 crore revenue line item annually just from water purifiers. Now, if you can do locks, then you can do a little bit more stuff. धीरे. I think if you play this out 10 more years, they will keep their compounding machine of services growing at 15-20% year on year. ठीक है, 5% EBITDA बनेगा, but उसमें से उसी customer को product बेच के, and then product की services will be the ultimate annuity revenue line item, right? That will keep adding. And it's crazy that I just checked while we were talking. My water purifier was $10,000. My every 6 months service was $1,500. Is that expensive? Right? And if I sign up for 3 years, तो lock in हो गया ना फिर. तो it's like typical SaaS. But वही services में, the only way you can make more EBITDA is if you have assurance of demand.
Yeah.
Assurance of demand है, तो you can then plan and optimize your supply, which is staffing, and make sure आप वहाँ full optimization कर लो. But
which is why the retention going down, I'm not very happy with. Right?
And you were also showing
yeah, by the way, like I actually firmly believe that as you scale, like तो typical बोलते हैं ना कि there are innovators, early adopters, then eventually you get to the skeptics, right? Who will start trying you because सब try कर रहे हैं. कुछ है ही नहीं और society will go बोल रहे हैं.
This point we have cut off. We don't have cohort sizes, unfortunately, from the DRHP. That would have given you the answer.
Yeah.
But if I just think about the arc of the company, it has been around since what, 2014-15?
16.
And we are 16, right? And we are seeing that the cohorts are degrading post-COVID, which is 21 onwards. So 5 साल में आपका early adopter तो हो गया ना, and it's not like you have grown like 100% year on year over the last like 3 years. You are growing at the same clip you are expected to grow. So it's not like your cohort sizes have expanded like crazy, which is why the retention.
I think ये तो ultimate India में सबके साथ जो food delivery में भी हो रहा है, right? In the end, Dipinder has come out and said, I know the results came out, but we couldn't cover it because we had too many other topics. But if you just look at his commentary, he's very clear that यार इसमें अब let's not fight more because we will have to create the market, and he doesn't want to put money to create the market versus taking a larger market share in grocery where he would do capital allocation very, very clearly. So I think these choices will become more and more clear for entrepreneurs as they scale that.
And I would also add one more thing, Revant, there, which is that you guys are actually, and this is something for me to think about as well, bring up an interesting point around the product side of the business, which I had not given a lot of credence or thought to so far, which I think could be interesting in the future. But then it also needs to be priced accordingly. अगर आप 2-3 billion पे, अगर आप 2.5-3 billion
I actually think the valuation will be sub 2 billion. I would be very surprised if it's beyond.
Yeah.
Right.
But Revant, on the product only, I think Tushar showed us one chart now wherein over the last 3 years, the product business hasn't also grown
नहीं,
a
but
lot.
that is the
दो अलग
product
product
business that they're
business
selling to the service providers कि उसको
अच्छा
shaving foam, shaving cream वो बेच रहे हैं, वो है वो
वो
मेरे
है
हिसाब से वो he's right, that's the key, like he's made a point around in the pre-read around that being a trade-off between take rate and product revenue, which is absolutely fair. But the
So you're saying
native brand
that's percentage of it. The native brands are percentage of that
native
product
brand
business.
native is already
native brand is
like
now
अलग line
is
item
huge now.
over the
Now
last
it is
3
far superseded that.
yeah
I hear the number is now close to 300 crores.
yeah
let me
so
see
Chirag
Uh,
क्या किया
yeah.
पहले they were only a services company then they realized that first actually it was from a customer experience point of view that they realized that if every customer service rep uses their own shaving foam, the experience will not be consistent. So they said, हमारे से shaving foam खरीदो, आप market से इतने में ले रहे हो, हम आपको इतने में देंगे करके. But they would come to a Shantanu and say कि like how a hotel would act, right? That they would try and make 20% margin there as well, right? So that was a revenue line item that has stayed constant now. जो नया revenue item आया है product का, which is native, which is the purifier, is I think going to balloon up the fastest. But
No, but is that there in the FY20 to 25 graph which you were showing, Tushar?
consolidated वाले में था let me just pull up कि India native segment कितना बड़ा है
नहीं, बट क्या है चिराग उसमें ना वो जो इंडेक्स है वो 100 रुपए का रेवेन्यू है वो टेक रेट से निकाल देता है वो. So I'm assuming that does not include native. That's a part of the service business जिसमें से कुछ
no
take rate
it's
है और
not
कुछ
no it's not Shantanu it's included in the native segment by the way if you see
आगे
this
देखते हैं एक
native segment that is like 100 crores in this year and revenue from operations is like 75 crores this year
बार. तो ये अलग है ना.
Hmm.
The way I would also frame potential here is if urban company can translate trust from service to, which is very hard to do by the way, from service to product. Like service companies typically struggle to sell, like you struggle to buy, and vice versa also. Like a Kaya from Marico is a service business built by a product DNA company, or a Taj Hotels ka product, which is again very hard. You find it very hard to do. If urban company can translate even half the trust from its service to its native brand, I think that brand can become a really valuable appliances and electronics company in the country.
Okay, so now we have the answer. Sorry to that earlier question.
I don't know if this is the chart that
The consumer product sales is in the India consumer businesses, services business, and native is only locks and purifiers.
yeah. ये देख लो ना ये Modern
Correct.
Context had a nice article.
Oh, अच्छा.
इसमें they have put this. So if you see, पहले ना native था ही नहीं last year. Month FY23 में native था ही नहीं. 70% India consumer. ये जो product sold to professional 17% था, international 11% था. And native has become now 10% in 9 months of FY24. With India consumer services actually degrowing. I mean, actually they grew, but the
proportion is
proportion
gone.
and products sold भी proportionately कम हुआ है. So this is continuing to compound और ये this will become a large part in my view. Over international भी grow हुआ है. I think they have, I don't know, are they in the US?
No, Singapore, UAE, and Saudi.
उन्होंने किया था बीच में expand, but now I think they've got to come back.
Yeah.
Australia they had once at one point.
Even US, I think they tried, but too expensive to do. I think but the cost of acquisition and servicing cost भी बहुत ज़्यादा है. Labor cost is significantly high. But
the underwriting, Tushar, in your view, is key. Underwriting is potential growth through native and efficiency in the service business, hopefully with better retention. That's where that's where the I don't know what listing proposal अलग है. But over if you to hold it for a long period of time, that these are the two risks.
That would need to be proven out. Like that's what you have to believe here.
Yeah, got it. Very interesting.
Interesting.
Frankly, I feel like company like urban companies should succeed, man.
So I can at least conclude. I can
100%. Yeah, they should succeed.
No. So everyone wants them to succeed. Mukund is a dear friend. Like I take a lot of his advice at least for my business as well. I mean, he's a great mentor, at least for me in my journey as improvement on how to think of running this business. But at least one thing I can conclude is Chirag, as usual, is going to sit on the fence. Tushar is not subscribing to the IPO, and Shantanu is going to subscribe to the IPO. So that's the
अपना नहीं बताया आपने.
हाँ?
अपना नहीं बताया.
मैं भाई कोई पब्लिक मार्केट में इन्वेस्ट नहीं करता हूँ मैं. I have zero exposure to public markets. I have far more comfort. Like, would I invest in a UC 8 years back? 100%. And you guys know how much private side, right? मतलब it's just मतलब मेरे को तो वो चाम मजा आता है यार कि फाउंडर एकदम. कल ही मैंने कुछ तो एक गेम डिस्कवर की ऑनलाइन, वो गेम खेला, ईगो हर्ट हुआ और खेला, एंड
मैथ वाला.
हाँ,
मैथ्स वाला.
मैं तो एडिक्ट हो गया. मेरा बॉस क्या है, देन आई कॉल 2-3 VCs की भाई ये फंडेड है, इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हो. तो बोलते हैं हमने सुना ही नहीं है. हम लाइक भाई मिलो जाके, एडिक्टिव गेम है ये, आग लगा देगा करके. ये तो मतलब
तो तन्मय ने सबको दिखा दिया वो गेम जो चिल्ला चिल्ला के.
Acha, I didn't know. It's Marmik sent it to me. So Marmik is apparently
Ah,
meeting them today.
okay.
And
Sorry, what is it? I have no idea. What is this?
I'll send you.
It's called Matix. Matiks. It's also interesting that the content space in India has just been on a tear the last 2 years. It's been tearing apart everything. I think cumulatively, that cohort of, and I know you guys covered it with Anand as well when he was on, but that cohort of companies was less than $100 million of revenue like 2 years ago. Now that cohort of companies is about $600 million of revenue.
That's crazy,
insane.
huh? That's just
Insane.
absolutely
Just 2
like
years.
6 companies which
Crazy.
were sub 100 million are now like each between 50 million and 100 million or maybe even more. And
more. Yeah,
but tell me
agree there.
this, like we got a lot of comments. Everyone loved that episode, the Anand Lunia episode on how to build for Bharat and how a stage and a Seekho and a friend and a Kuku FM are all sort of doing very, very well. And UPI Autopay has been the game changer. But I'm also hearing that the other side now saying that some of it is dark patterns. Like you may not see it because of Twitter pe nahi hai. Like when there's a dark pattern on Zepto, everyone shouts because they're on Twitter or X. But if there is a dark pattern on a stage or a friend and, you know, money is deducted without you knowing it, nobody's coming on X and complaining. But there are those complaints if you start taking customer feedback. Is that?
Yeah, that's, I would say that obviously broad brush statements are tough to make, but I think that is also increasingly a part of the experience of the user. If you look at the app ratings, user feedback, etc., I think some of that is happening for sure, where you take a UPI autopay mandate with 1 rupee and then there is a chota sa likha hua niche phone pay ke upar ki 199 rupees per month after first month, something like that. Also, it is also skewing, by the way, like some of these companies are also optimizing their channel of acquisition by targeting devices where a certain UPI app is the preferred UPI app for the user, because a certain UPI app has an easier way to run dark patterns than some other UPI apps do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
So that is where the marketing budgets are also going.
ये एक worry है भारत का.
It could be cause and effect, by the way. It could be just because they're seeing more efficiency from that spend, so they're saying कि चलो हम आगे चलते हैं. Or it could be that, oh, this dark pattern works here better, so that could. So I don't want to speculate on behalf of other people, but I think that is increasingly becoming a part of the user experience, which is obviously not good. Also, in some cases, it does not tie in with the level of engagement you see. Like the retention that they have on the user side does not tie in with the usage retention that you see on those platforms, or the time spent that you see by people on those platforms. Like if someone is paying you, 200 rupees a month, it is, and they are retained, say, 50% till M12, it is unlikely that till M12 they are only using you for 2 minutes a week.
But just last point on this, just to Netflix pricing क्या है अभी India में?
199.
199, right? A month.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are saying Bharat mein people are paying 199 a month for content. I think Netflix is the gold standard of content for everybody, including tier 2 in that sense, right? Or at least Amazon Prime also has so many languages and so much high quality content.
Revant, I don't think it's only entertainment content, by the way, where people are paying. Seekho, for example, and even Seekho example, for example, is a great example of a different type of content format, which is a very learning oriented, brain rot se brain food ki taraf jaane wala content, right? Then there is different content formats. So there is audio, where a Cuckoo and a Pocket sort of end up thriving the most.
Cuckoo now has 2 video apps also, which are each 10 minutes.
Cuckoo is now becoming a house of things. So it has a video app, it has an audio app, which is the core. It has a learning app. It is also potentially coming out with a new product, which I don't want to talk about right now. Then you have the astro side and the religious side of the story as well, with a Srimandir type of a player, which is also doing really well. Then you have the interaction content side of the play, which an Elo or a friend plays on, which is also doing well. So my point is, it's not simply to say that सब जो है खाली video entertainment के लिए पैसा दे रहे हैं इन सब जगहों को. उसमें format में, type of style में, interaction में, हर चीज में innovation है, where people are paying for some of these things differently. So while we bucket them as a content category, microtransaction, subscription type of plays, I don't think these are all companies which are like for like to each other. And you know what I think who the biggest sort of losers are in this sort of the last 2 years have been? It's probably been our friends at ShareChat and our friends at Daily Hunt and all of these guys, because they kept on building the advertisement business thinking that the subscriptions will never take off, while the rest of the market proved to them that boss subscription direct monetization se bhi game ban jayega.
Actually, very interesting point. Now, these are all like $4-5 billion valued companies, which are now not that high in revenue. They're all 100 million or 150 million revenue. But now you have these companies that have raised less than 50 million in cash, and are like
profitable, growing quickly, found a niche where they can dominate at least for some time before competition kicks in.
Yeah, phenomenal.
I'll give you another stat on UPI Autopay, by the way. About these content transactions are only like less than 10% of UPI Autopay. The biggest, like I think 40-50% of Autopay transactions today are SIPs. तो द बिहेवियर इज कि यार थोड़ा सा इंक्रीमेंट मिला है, चल 2 ऐसे भी चालू कर देता हूँ, थोड़ा सा और मिला है, चल 2 और कर देता हूँ, चल 2 और
वो चलते रहता है
पीपल, वो चलता रहता है क्योंकि मैं तो इंक्रीमेंटल सैलरी से डाल रहा हूँ ना, तो अगर मेरा कॉस्ट, मेरा 10,000 सैलरी बढ़ा, 3,000 का मैंने खर्चा बढ़ा दिया अपना, बाकी 7,000 का मैंने 2 SIP ऑर्डर दिया.
And that's why see that the SIP flows actually never stop. Even if the market drops, SIP flows are continuing क्योंकि वो
Autopay में चल रहा है पूरा. Yaar, I was shocked. There was a survey that we had done internally, like I would say, at my previous employer, where we did the survey on financial services Autopay वगैरह. I was shocked. 30% of people have more than 5 UPI Autopay SIPs running.
Wow.
शर्म आ गया मुझे.
You have so much money that you decide कि अच्छा PMS को दे दो करके.
नहीं.
लोग आके मिल रहे हैं कि भाई दे दे ऑटो पे.
But Tushar, this is so fascinating. Like, it's so fascinating to see, how sharp your insights are, and like some of the second, or when Revant, was putting together a vision statement for Asymmetric, he said we need to come up with second order insights. None of my insights were even first order for him. So then I had to figure out, yeah, how do we get there? But today you've been like really outstanding, like really good to take notes. And
it's always been like great to chat with all of you guys, looking at you, learning from all of you. Revant and Chirag I've known for a long time. We have worked together. We have we have seen karate fights in Dubai together. But it's great to finally meet with you, Shantanu.